for entertainment purposes only. And if you want true legal advice, contact your own lawyer.
So Todd has 13. Denise has 12. Oh, boy.
Oh,
There's one more case or no case left. We'll see how this all plays out. Denise is not going to want to show up. Let's have Seth play for me.
I'm going to phone a friend.
Seth says, yeah, probably not going to be back. Not if Denise has anything to say about it.
The way this is going.
And even his answer when we came back for the break was more Denise-like, where he talked about thinking about it and doing all this and then told us he wasn't changing his answer.
And that
I was trying to eliminate the brevity.
Yes. Harvey Weinstein, on the heels of that, failed rides at Disneyland, the Harvey Weinstein experience. Harvey Weinstein back in the news. He's got his case going, and he has shaken up his legal team.
Well, that's an understatement.
Yes. Having a difficult time finding representation. Look, any attorney, if you're willing to pay the money, I'll represent you. But having the ability to find representation that he can agree with on legal strategy and going forward.
And let me say this. Anybody that's going to be in, I don't want to say in Harvey Weinstein's position, but anybody that has a criminal matter that keeps flip-flopping and searching for attorneys and getting rid of some and hiring some new ones, there's got to be a point where you have to say, okay, I'm going to listen to the advice that they're giving me. I mean, looking through these names of attorneys that have been on Weinstein's case, former Casey Anthony attorney Jose Baez.
If you pay my fee, I'll take your case.
Yeah, Hollywood power lawyer Benjamin Brofman, Harvard law professor Ron Sullivan, ex-Kobe Bryant lawyer Pamela McKay, former prosecutor Duncan Levin. Good grief.
I know he's got a lot. Look, the first attorney that he had, or the attorney that did, for example, the preliminary hearing, was successful in getting some of the charges dismissed at the preliminary hearing. Now, that's not a small feat there, because at the preliminary, the burden of proof at a preliminary hearing, I've always viewed it as it's essentially the same burden that a law enforcement officer has to make an arrest. Arrests have to be made on probable cause. And that's essentially the same thing that a judge is looking for. They talk about it in terms of, would a reasonable person believe that based upon these facts, is there enough to entertain that the accused, that a crime has occurred and that you are the one that did it? I'm not saying you're guilty of it, but there's enough to send it to a trial. And the first attorney was successful in getting some of the charges bounced. Say, look, there's not even probable cause that something happened with that person. Yeah. So that was a win. I think that what happened in Weinstein's case, in my opinion, was influenced a little bit by what we saw happen last year with Judge Kavanaugh, when we had the accuser come in and she laid out before the confirmation board her case, and the Republicans had a female attorney come in to ask the questions because it looked different. I think after that, Weinstein wanted to get a female on board that would be more favorable to the jury, more sympathetic, able to connect, and it wouldn't look like a bunch of men against women. We're going to continue with this discussion when we come back, but we're going to talk about issues about when you get a new attorney, why, what are some of the considerations, and what are some of the things that Weinstein in particular is facing. You're listening to Radio Law Talk. We're at the bottom of the hour break. Cal?
We, in fact, are. And I want to remind you to stay tuned for more Radio Law Talk right here on this radio station. And wherever it is you're listening, we thank you. But also, just a reminder, there's always RadioLawTalk.com.
We're talking about Harvey Weinstein and his criminal case and how he's changing lawyers. Cases. Well, the criminal one that's going on right now, maybe multiple individuals, but that's multiple victims mentioned, but it's been consolidated into one case that's being tried now, and he's bringing in new attorneys again. The new attorneys coming in are Donna Rotuno and Damon Sharonis. They're out of Chicago, and I think Rotuno has been referred to as the hero to male clients accused of sexual assault. She's handled more than 40 such cases and has success. As a prosecutor, I've been up against attorneys that handle primarily sexual assault-oriented cases. And I can tell you that unlike any other area of defense, the attorneys that go in to represent these folks, right, wrong, or otherwise, they peel the onion on the victim. And they look into background, and in essence, the case ends up being something where they put the victim and their credibility on the stand, like they're being put on trial. It's a reason why a lot of these cases settle if a defendant is willing to settle for something less, because and why the prosecution sometimes is willing to give away more than what they normally would have gotten at trial to spare the victim of having to basically be victimized again, as they describe it, by being put on the stand and basically having their whole life combed through with a fine-tooth comb by a very thorough defense attorney. And the defense attorneys doing their job, defending their client zealously, but
and there's a quote on down the line here, but I when I read through this, and I was like, the first thing that came to my mind was bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off. And the reason I say that is because this whole Me Too movement, this massive triggering event, and Harvey Weinstein being right at the center of it, there wouldn't be anything better, I think, as far as publicity is concerned, for him to do than hire a female attorney that specifically specializes in getting men off of these type of cases.
Exactly. When you do jury selection, for example, in a trial, when I've done it, you have to understand that, again, right, wrong, or otherwise, and that's the last time I'm going to use that specific phrase there. Jury trials and criminal prosecutions are about more than just the facts. The juries are humans. We talked about the difference between having a robot or an automatic drone versus having a pilot in the cockpit. We've talked about judges versus having some algorithm decide cases, and the same thing is true with juries. They are people, and they formulate opinions during jury selection. And during jury selection, it's very easy to put off the wrong aura, the wrong look, the wrong whatever, to turn the jury off. And I think a concern in this case is where you have a defense filled with nothing but men. And then maybe you have a prosecution that's got male. I don't know who's prosecuting this case, what the gender is. But then you got a jury sitting there, and it looks like, you get the female victim who comes in, and the optic can consciously or unconsciously sway the jury. So having a female defense attorney come in, and I rather suspect that Rotuno knows this, and it might be one of the reasons she chose that career, that I'm an effective litigator, I'm female, I can practice in this area and be very effective here because of the way that I can do things that a male attorney can't. I can impact the jury the way somebody else cannot. And,
She definitely made her name for herself. I mean, I imagine her retainer isn't $1,500.
Probably $1,675 and change. But, yeah, so Weinstein brings her in. But, you can bring in all the attorneys that you want as a defendant, but at some point in time, you have to listen to the advice that they give. And, one of the things that was cautioned with Weinstein in particular is people think in criminal cases, it's common to change attorneys. And those of us on the outside start to read the tea leaves and think, maybe there's trouble in paradise. This isn't working. That isn't working. We do know that a previous attorney who got out in his moving papers indicated that he had a conflict of interest with how to do the case, and he and Weinstein were at odds, and I believe even indicated that they have both retained attorneys to talk about communication with each other. That is clearly a contentious relationship between an attorney, but that doesn't always happen, and you can't always read into that just because a new attorney is brought in. Cal?
I think when the curtain was peeled back on all of this type of strategy was during the O.J. Simpson trial.
Yes.
Where people said the facts apparently don't matter. legal strategy, selecting the jury, posturing the client in the eyes of the jury. You know how they dressed up O.J. Simpson's home to be very African-American looking when they brought the jury around for a tour, even though that was not the decor of the Simpson home at the time. I think the curtain was peeled back on strategy versus facts. And apparently this is just another extension of that same thing, is what it would seem like to me, an outsider. Am I wrong on that, Seth?
No, and one of the things that this Messero guy says is that criminal defense is an art, not a science. And it's a show. It's theater. It's putting on, what you think the jury's going to want to see.
Emotion.
And that's why I said you bring in this woman, and I don't know much about criminal law or defense or prosecution or anything like that. I'm in kind of a different realm, but in the PI world, it's similar. It's, hey, we got a client here, and we're going to put this client on the stand, but for us, we have to prep that client. It is a show. Is this client going to be likable? Is it a man? Is it a woman? What's our jury consist of?
Sympathetic. What kind of emotions will they draw out of the jurors?
Right.
Correct.
And so all that comes into play.
I think there's two ways that you can look at this. And by the way, you referenced Messero. Messero is Thomas Messero. He was one of Bill Cosby's attorneys. That was who Seth was talking about, who had made that statement. I think you can look at the optics and why they do this from two different perspectives. One perspective is, you're in there trying to create a false impression, trying to do whatever. And look, I think that is, to a certain extent, questionable, but you're going to do it. I think there's a reason they do it. Countless interviews with jurors after trial, when you talk about why they sided one way or another, I'm always amazed when I'm able to hear from a juror about what actually swayed them one way or another. And a lot of times it has nothing to do with the facts. And you'll have a juror say, I just didn't like the guy, or I didn't like this. And so we know that's going on in the jury pool. So in the case of Simpson, we have that going on. In the case of, if I'm a prosecutor and I'm putting the victim on the stand, or if you're putting your client on the stand as a plaintiff to tell their story, maybe you don't dress them up in a way that will unduly influence the jury. But by the same token, you got to look at the other side. I don't want them wearing something that would unduly distract or detract from their story, right? So if I'm a prosecutor and I put the victim on the stand to tell their story, I want them to dress in conservative clothing, nothing revealing, nothing that. I want the jury to pay attention to you. Don't come into court wearing, your ratty jeans and a ripped T-shirt and all of that kind of stuff, because you could have the greatest story in the world, but your appearance will detract from that story. We want the jury to hear the facts and hear the story. So there's kind of two ways to go there,
while at the same time leaving a favorable impression.
Absolutely.
I mean, as a defense lawyer, every guy that comes into court all of a sudden has a nice haircut, is wearing fairly nice clothing compared. I mean, he's not wearing the stuff he wore when he got arrested.
No.
I got to see the Jodi Arias trial when I was in law school in Arizona.
Oh,
yeah?
Got
to be in the courtroom for that, and that was very interesting.
Sure.
Compared to what she looked like before in the pictures and what they depicted, and then what she looked like on the stand, it was...
Probably the biggest thing that a defense attorney does at a minimum is when they're defending somebody who's in custody, and making sure that during the trial they get to wear regular clothes and not the prison orange. And sometimes folks do have to be cuffed, but they'll have one hand cuffed to the chair so that their free hand, usually hand they write with, is open, so that the jury is not swayed by that. And that's just the considerations that they have to deal with.
Go to the website, radiolawtalk.com. That's radiolawtalk.com.